Don't cross the streams.
Why?
It would be bad.
I'm fuzzy on the whole good-bad thing. What do you mean bad?
Try to imagine all life as you know it stopping instantaneously and every molecule in your body exploding at the speed of light.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and this is going to be the follow-up of my conversation with Comicron's John Jackson Miller that I published on Sunday. That video, of course, was dealing essentially with 90s comic sales, but our conversation was much bigger than that, and I wanted to bring some more of that here today. So we're going to talk about market factors and even other factors, including seasonal and weather factors that actually play in predicting future comic book sales and what it takes to inject new life into the industry. And we're going to talk about that today. And it turns out I had so much extra audio, it would have been in like a 30-minute video here. So today we're going to talk about that. Then there's going to be another video of my conversation with John Jackson Miller on Thursday. That will be the final one where we talk about what the comic book market is going to look like, possibly in a post-COVID-19 universe. I think people are going to enjoy that one as well. But please stick around. I think you're going to like this video where we kind of talk about the factors that you need to take into consideration when predicting future comic book sales.
As many people look at this factor or that factor, or they want to be, they want to be concerned about what's in the comics or cover prices or anything else, haven't looked. And as a data person, you probably understand this. There's an inertia in a ongoing data set, in a trend that is caused by the structure of what makes the data, of what's behind the data. So that the number one thing that is, if you were to ask me any given comic book, what's my guess at its sales this month? The first thing you're going to ask is, what were the sales last month? Because it's very likely going to look very much like that. Why? Retailers are subscription agents. They've got folders. They've got a customer base that has said, order me this copy, order me this many copies, and it usually takes the customer has to actually say, stop this comic book at issue 644, coming in and doing that. The number one thing, that's the factor you want to look at is what it was before, what was it selling before, how much money was coming in before. That will dictate how much the retailer is going to be able to order of the next thing. You do have situations where there will be a book that's a big deal. It's a high-profile event or something like that. That will bring in new dollars from outside, and it will also get the retailer to pull dollars from the sidelines, either the bank account or from other product lines like toys or action figures or games or something else that the retailer's carrying. So an example of that would be, we had a slump in 2009, 2010 after the recession. DC's New 52 comes about in the fall of 2011. I remember people were asking at the time, how big could this be? Our guess was it could be big, but it's going to be limited by how much money is out there in the stores. It would have been bigger if we had been doing well. But even so, it was enough of a big event. The word is overperformed. We believe it must have brought in new money. It must have brought in money off the sidelines. And so that's a reason why, when we have, again, situations like last month, March of 2020 was comparing against March of 2019. March of 2019 had Detective Comics 1000. Detective Comics 1000 was a half million copies sold for $5 million. The sales in March were down mainly because of the coronavirus problem, also down because of, we didn't have Detective 1000. And you might look at that and say, well, that money was in the stores last year. So if they weren't buying, if the retailers didn't buy Detective 1000, they would have bought something else. I'm not sure that's true.
No.
I think some of that money would have gone to other comic books, but I think some of that's new money, and not having an equivalent to Detective 1000 in the comparison year the next time around, I think that's meaningful. I think that means something. And, we could have had it if we had a normal month in March. Flash had his 80th anniversary issue, and
Robin 80th anniversary Flash.
Robin had it. Spider-Woman, that could have been a 200,000 copy book instead of what it was, which is 140 and change. We'll never know. We just know that if you've read my past reports, it had been a decent looking winter up until about the first week of March. Stuff that I've been discovering as I go along is how seasonal comics were, far more than even we think today. I was watching a podcast earlier today where it was Steve Jeppe and the publishers, and they were talking about how some of them were seeing orders actually going up over what they thought they would be for the books that will be shipping next. If that seems counterintuitive at all, if you think about it, sales should be going up with the temperature. That is what's always happened in comics. It's just that, in the old days, 50, 60 years ago, magazine sales were colossally higher in the summer than they were in the winter. If you go back and look at a lot of old comics, well, the first thing you'll discover is that a whole lot of comics you think should have been monthly weren't. Things you think are monthly were actually bi-monthly or something like that. But one of the big ones was 9 times a year. And what they would do is basically it would be monthly in the summer and bi-monthly through the winter. In some cases, there are books that would be like 14 a year. So you would get 2, it would double up in the summer. Archie did a lot of that.
That probably has a lot to do with kids not being at school, so they're home. They have some free time. They're no longer completely constricted to homework and things like that.
And if you think about it, how hard it is. Where are you at? Or are you in the Southwest?
I'm in the Philippines.
Oh, the Philippines. Well, geez. Okay. Well, never mind. I was going to say, but if you live in Arizona, you could probably go to the comic, go to the grocery store, the convenience store, the drugstore any time of the year. Mm-hmm. But if you live in New York City or whatever, and there's snow, it's harder to get around in the winter. Or if you live in where I live, Wisconsin, it's harder to get around, harder to get to the store. If it's hard now, imagine what it was in the 1940s, the 1950s. So just all manner of things. Commerce declined in the winter. One of the things, and you said that the topic here is the 90s that we want to look at. One of the things that we discovered in the 90s is that comics didn't need to take a season off. Comics didn't need to take the winter off. It continued to happen because the publishers just were used to publishing less. And so it was called the dead quarter for a while, the first quarter of the year. But the fact is, it wasn't that really the sales were off that bad. In fact, it was a pretty good time to get a book launched if you were going to do it, because there was less competition out there. In the boom in the early 90s, we see some decent numbers in the winters. A couple of the only brighter spots in I want to get the years right. It's 1995 and 1996. So we're already going down. It's going that way at this point. Heroes World has happened at the end of 94. So at the beginning of 95, we still have multiple distributors, but Marvel is probably going to go exclusive at that point. What is the big editorial event in winter of 95? Well, that's the death of Charles Xavier. That's the Age of Apocalypse, where Marvel takes the entire X-Men line, and cancels all the books for 4 months and renames them all. And if you think about that editorial event, it would have sold a lot more in the summer, but by doing it when they did, they were the only game in town. That's a series we remember very well, and it helped the direct market to the extent that anything was helping the direct market in that period. 95, we're losing stores like crazy by that point. 94 was not as bad as it could have been, basically because of Magic the Gathering, because that game had come out in 93 and was starting to get, starting to go everywhere. Summer of 94, it was like printing money. And if you're a store that could get it, it was crack for gamers because people were spending so much on it. I remember spending 100 hours to get a box of Magic Legends cards. And 4 months later, I sold it to my retailer for 400 hours, thinking that there's just no way in the world this can keep its value. And I remember when I went in, my girlfriend thought, "What have you just sold him? Were there drugs in that box or something like that? That's insane that it cost that much." And the fact is, that's like a $20,000 box right now. I greatly regret that. But Magic had sort of lost its ability to be, the money machine by the time we get to the winter of 95, because Magic has by that point oversaturated. They did a release called Fallen Empires, which really just stunk, and nobody wanted it. And it was massively overprinted, or rather, the printing actually caught up with the demand. And so, yeah, if it weren't for Marvel having done Age of Apocalypse in the winter, that would have been a rough time. And again, the next year, what was the big winter event in 1996? It was Marvel versus DC. It was placed such that and if you remember that series, that had Marvel published 2 issues of it, DC published 2 issues of it, and in between issue 3 and 4, that was when the Amalgam Universe happened. And the Amalgam Universe actually came out February 29th, so on Leap Day of 96. So they ended up putting this big event once again in the worst selling time of the year. But it helped. The people were there. And so
maintain interest for the customers.
Yeah. And, I think a mistake that happened is 97, 98, 99, as things get really dire, and Marvel's in bankruptcy by this point. Nobody's willing to risk anything. And, this is a business which is built on cash flow. And if you don't have any big hits, there's no money coming in. Yeah, we would have a nice holiday season, but then the money would dry up because there's nothing coming out. This was bad when it was in that stretch. It takes us getting to 2001, where the Ultimate books are coming out. The week before 9/11, that's when Wolverine: The Origin comes out, the first issue. That's kind of the moment when I believe the turnaround happened. That's when Marvel gets editorially its act together a lot more. Basically, we start shaking off some of the malaise that had happened. Well, what happens in the winter of 2002? Well, that's when DC decides to put out Frank Miller's Return to the Dark Knight. So is Dark Knight Strikes Again. Once again, a book that would have sold a lot more copies in the summer, but they committed it to this period here where it helped. It helps to have a big event there. To a large degree, the modern industry has figured seasonality out. It still happens that we have less volume in the winter, and I've often said that a rough first quarter can be fixed with just a good April, because the amount of volume is different. I will say that they've put a lot of launches in that winter frame. Star Wars goes back to Marvel, January of 2015. This particular last year, normally around Christmas, they just go away. Diamond shuts down for a week, 2 weeks, and it's a skip week for everybody. What they've been doing over the last couple of years is they've been creating a small slate of books that will come out for Christmas Day, for New Year's Day, and they'll ship them to the retailers beforehand. Diamond's staff can still have their holiday, because remember, these people are working weekends to get these books shipped everywhere anyway. So to keep it from being, I guess, a time and a half double overtime situation, and give people a holiday, they figured out, well, we don't have to go dark during this period like a TV network would do. We don't have, we can have new programming. Obviously, what everybody's been worrying about and wondering about over the last 6 weeks is, well, this is now the first time that we've gone dark as a network, where there hasn't been new material. Obviously that's a different podcast than one talking about the 90s, and I've done 2 or 3 of them this month as it is. But again, that is the trick with this, is that it's a cash flow driven business.
Yeah, a friend of mine, he was an X-Men completionist.
Yeah,
and his goal, he was going to go back. He's still working on his Uncanny X-Men run. I think he's got a lot of the key ones, but that's an expensive run to acquire in the end. But so he gets up to, I believe it was X-Men Gold and X-Men Blue.
Yeah,
and they did the 1 in 1,000 variants. And day one, the prices on them, I believe they were Jim Lee covers that they repurposed. They won, the prices were $1,000. That was the day he stopped being an X-Men completionist.
Somebody actually asked me about that on Twitter a couple of days ago. Asked whether those books are holding value. I looked a couple of places. I'm not really in that game anymore, but the Key Collector Comics app, they kind of zero in on that audience. They don't do grades, and they also don't do numbers for CGC. But if you look on, I looked on Mile High's website, and the highest grade that they even cite a price for it in is like fine, and they've got it at $1,350. So now they don't have any copies in stock.
That wraps up today's conversation. I hope you all enjoyed it. I switched it up as far as the transition between topics. We didn't use music today. We used the Bat transition from the old Batman TV show. Hopefully people like that more. If not, please let me know in the comment section below, and definitely be tuning back in Thursday to listen to the very last part of my conversation with John Jackson Miller, where we get specifically into the effects of COVID-19 on the current comic book market and moving forward, and what we can learn from past events in the comic book market. And we also talk a little bit about, kind of some funny variants and other weird, one-off, two-off in the comic industry and how those came about. And I will see you then. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.